Hi, welcome back to my studio. I'm Barbara Swift and you're watching BSwiftArt. In today's video we're going to do loose poppies. Poppies is another one of August's flowers. So I'm just going to show you how I go about doing these loose poppies, and then we're going to add some negative painting in the background. So make sure you just watch it through to the end. So I'm just starting out just doing kind of a base color for my poppies. They're going to end up red. And I have to apologize in advance because I lost the footage to where I did this on the original painting. So I just tried to duplicate for you so you knew what I did. So I'm starting out with just some light yellow. And I'm using my flat brush. You want to use as big a brush as you can. But the flat brush is really great for loose florals because you can use it sideways or you can use it flat. And when you use it flat, it'll make a smoother, rounded leaf. But if you want to have nice lacy edges, you can just use the side of the brush. And I'm just using little C curves when I'm doing this, just dabbing it around. And the paint is pretty wet. So the wetter it is, the more it will blend together. So I'm coming on top of that wet paint, wet on wet technique. And I'm putting another second layer on with my orange here. This is vermilion. It's kind of a corally color. I'm using Magello Mission Gold paints. And I'm just adding another layer on, and I'm letting a little bit of that light yellow peek through on the outer edges. And I'm putting some bottom leaves that curve up towards the center so the flowers are sideways. Some of the flowers have leaves all the way around, or I should say petals. And those ones will, be more directly looking at you. So I got a couple side ones and a couple buds. And then I'm going to let that set for a few minutes and coming in with some thicker red paint. This is maybe the consistency of whipping cream. And the other was, what I started out with was quite thin, so maybe like a skim milk. So this is more thicker. So when it's thicker, it doesn't spread as much. It'll just kind of incorporate into the painting and leave your lines that you make. Where if it were thinner, it would blend completely wherever the wet water is. So that's the end of my recap on that one. So sorry about that. But yeah, and then I did come back and take the toilet tissue and just blotting it. And at this point, I'm just trying to lighten it a little bit. So you can see it takes off some of it and it leaves you some lighter and darker places. And then I come back with my brush and just kind of tweak it however I want it to be. So I want to leave some of those light places, and some of them I'm blending. And then you can actually make another layer of petals this way by, blending and not going all the way to the edge. And it looks more like a layer like I'm doing on that one there. So yeah, I want to leave some of that light in there. And now this is what it same stage, but on the painting that I'm actually meant to show you, and this is the one I'll show you right to the end, so you can see how I did that. So I'm just going to take some sap green, and I'm going to just put a little dab there on the bottom of that flower and bring a stem down. And now on the poppies, the buds always face to the ground, and they have kind of a wavy stem. So these, I'm going to put them on the bud. And just wherever those stems might be. So each flower is connected to a stem. And I'm using my round brush to do this. And using just kind of the tip of it, the point of it. In the end, I'll come back and strengthen up those stems. But for right now, I just wanted the idea of where they were going to be. So I went ahead and drew them in there. And we'll just leave them like that for now. And then, like I said, we'll come back to them. So now I'm going to go back into my poppy, and now I can kind of see the shapes that the brush strokes had left previously, and it's all dry now. And I'm coming back with the red, and I'm going to try to separate some of those petals. I don't want to get too detailed, so that it looks like a photograph or anything like that. It's still going to be loose. So I'm just coming in with that thicker red and just going over some of the lines, some of the folds and waves that would be in the petals naturally. And then I'm coming back with just wet water on my brush and just softening those lines. So I'm strengthening some of that top edge, but notice that I'm leaving a little bit of that light behind, and that'll help to separate the petals. So it looks like there's a double layer of petals on this big poppy. And also I'm trying to stay darker towards the center. So I added a little bit of yellow just then, and the yellow mixed with the red and made an orange. So I like to have that variation of color in there. Outline the edge just a little bit and blend it into the background one, because the front one is going to have where the light hits it. And just come back and soften it with just plain water. Move it around a little bit. And I do that all around the whole entire poppy, and trying to keep that red concentrated more in the center so that it looks like it cups in a little bit. And I'm leaving my outer petals light on the edges. Just softening with that damp brush. And sometimes you might find a little curve in there. Now, none of that was intentional. It's just something that you see afterwards. So when you're going through with that initial yellow and those brush strokes, you're just kind of shaping it in, roughing it in. And now this is where you can come in and do some little details with the folds and the waves that are in the petals. So I'm just using the red to do that, and then the water to soften it out. And I'll make some of those edges bleed into the background. So leaving some white spaces. You don't want to do it solid because it'll all be really fuzzy around all the edges. So leave some white. You can bleed some of that in. Just plain water with a fatter mop brush. And I'm going to add some dark purple in the center. I grew poppies in my yard when I lived in Michigan. They were my grandma's poppies. So those were the kind that everyone says are the California poppies that they outlawed because of opium. I don't know if they really were, but everyone says, oh, those are illegal. But they always had that purple in the center like that, and then a big puffy poof of stamens in the middle. So we're going to add stamens too. Now this is kind of a bottom petal that's curled up. So I'm letting the darkest part be on that bottom edge, and then the top is the lighter edge where the sun would be hitting it. And I'm just going to let some of those edges bleed into one another. When you do that, it also makes an interesting background, and if you put another layer of watercolor on that background, you'll still see where you had that bleed come from the main flowers. So it makes it interesting. And this one too, that bottom front petal is kind of curled up towards the center of the flower because it's not open all the way. So in my paintings, I like to have different sizes of flowers, and always a main big flower, which I call the Papa Bear. Then you got the Mama Bear and the Baby Bear. So my art teacher Sharon had taught me that. So you have 3 different shapes of main flowers, and then always have odd numbers look good. You put some buds in there. Gives your viewer something more to look at than just the one main flower. Because this is going to be kind of like in a field, kind of growing in a field. So go ahead and put my purple in there. I'm trying to be real careful not to cover up that bottom petal and it was a little bit too wet, so to control the water, all you have to do is dab it up with some toweling, or this is toilet tissue because it has less patterns in it. So if you'll notice when you tap it down like that and you pull it up, if your paint is thick enough, it'll leave the quilted pattern of the paper towel in there. So I always try to get the smoothest kind I can. And Viva paper towels are pretty smooth, although they did come out with a new kind that has the quilting in it, but the original ones they still have, and they're a little bit thicker, and those ones don't have that pattern in it. Plus they're very absorbent, so it's great for wiping off your brush. So I always buy Viva paper towels for that. So I'm still coming in here, separating some of those petals, leaving those highlighted areas so that it looks like the sun's shining on them. And keeping it darker towards the center. And softening it with water. So I like to build a lot of layers when I do my paintings. It's just the way that I do it, and others do it the same way too, but I'm trying to just say that there are no rules. You can do it however you like it. There's no right or wrong. So don't ever think that if it didn't turn out just the way mine did, that you didn't do anything wrong. It's just your style, and your style naturally develops as the more and more you paint. As you keep going painting, people will start to recognize that that was your painting and that's what your style is. So I'm just softening those edges, letting them bleed out with just damp brush. And I like those big fat round brushes. They hold a lot of water in them, so it's great for doing this kind of thing. And I'm just trying to soften out where it might look like I diffused on purpose. I didn't really want like streaks following the water. So I soften them out when I see them. And then this one, the center might be covered up just a little bit by the petal, so try to make them all a little different. I dab my purple in there. Okay, now take a look at it, and I'm pretty happy with what I have so far. I might need to darken up some more centers. So I got my fat little round brush again. And now I'm just going to real lightly, almost like it's in the background, put some real watery leaves. Just, you know, kind of shaggy leaves on the poppy. They almost look like dandelion leaves to me. So I'm just throwing them in there. We're going to do some negative painting on top of this, so they're not defined at all. But I just want to basically have color and that shape, that shaggy shape. So it'll look like another layer of leaves in the background, even though they're not defined at all. So I'm just kind of not being, you don't have to be too careful, but try to get that shaggy kind of pointy end shape on those. And I'm using, I believe I dipped that into the olive green or olive, which somebody told me that it's actually a yellow, which I can see that has a lot of yellow in it. And then just coming back up here with some ochre. But it's just another layer of color in there. A little bit more on the brown tones. More greens. And I'm letting those colors mix and mingle. So the paint underneath is still quite wet. And when I put another color on top of it, they just bleed together. And where we didn't completely blend in those colors from the poppies into the background, and I told you we were going to leave some white spots, that'll leave more of a hard edge when that paint hits the white spot, and then that makes it interesting as well. Can always soften them if they're not exactly where you want them to be. And I'm going to come in some more with more colors. The Viridian. I like this color a lot. It's kind of a blue-green. I use that in a lot of my paintings. And I'm just building up layers, kind of making illusions of leaves, kind of atmospheric. So when we do the negative painting, all these colors will show through. And I try to leave some light areas in the painting. Not put quite as much color in some corners as other corners. And come on in with some blue. Got some cobalt. Because blue and red contrast on the color wheel, and it's always a nice combination. I don't want to get too carried away. I don't want to go too dark, or you won't see the negative painting when we do it. So I'm just doing a light wash, real light. And just putting all those colors in that background. And right there in that center part especially, I thought it was a little darker than I wanted to, so I just went ahead and controlled that water. Now here is where I did the negative painting, so I'm going to show you how to do that. It takes a long time, so I didn't have time for in the video. But what I do is take a little bit thicker paint, maybe the cream consistency, and I kind of outline a shape in there. So these are some big leaves that are going to be in the background. Just outline that shape and then take a damp brush, and on only the one side, on the outer side, I blend it out into the background with that damp brush. And then the other side, I leave that nice crisp hard edge. And why it's called negative painting is because you're painting around a negative space. So the actual flower or leaves that you're seeing is the negative space. So that's a really very useful technique in watercolor painting, is that negative painting. And you can come back and paint in that negative space if you want. I'm just adding a few veins of the leaves so that you can see what they are. And then I'm softening them with the water because I want them to be barely there. But I like this effect. I mean, it's not really anything that's natural that you would see in nature like that when you outline a leaf or a flower like that, but I think it adds a lot to the paintings. You might have heard me say before, I'm not very much of a realistic painter, so I like things to look more artsy, more like they were painted, but try to keep it in an interesting way. So I'm not worried about the stems there that I painted on, because this leaf is going to be completely in the background and the stems will be in the foreground. So this is just stuff that's going on behind it. And I thought it might be just a little bit too light, and I wanted to add some of the purple since I have the purple in the center of the flowers. So I put some purple in there. I put a little bit of the green. And I'm just trying to create a little bit more interest in this one because it was more white than the two on the sides. So I'll put a little bit of all those colors that I put in the background and put them in. And I'm just going to kind of let them mingle for a little bit, and then I'm going to come back and blot them, to soften it. Because trying to mimic what I did on the top part of the poppy painting there, see? So when I put that toilet tissue over, it kind of blotted it up and it made it more equal to the two that were on the side. And so now this one over here, I'm just going to come and put some of those veins that would be in these big leaves, softening them with just plain water and letting it bleed, letting it go do its thing, just tapping it where I think it needs a little bit more color. And yeah, so I did quite a bit of negative painting on here, so you'll see some more here when I go and do some more leaves. I'll show you again how I did it. It's a really good technique because you can outline little parts maybe in the background. Like here I see where I put that leaf in, I see a shape in there. So I just went ahead and painted on that line, and then on one side I softened it out with the water, and then it defines it. So now that leaf appeared right there where it wasn't before. There wasn't exactly a defined leaf there at all, but now there is. So I'm going to go around my painting, and whenever I see a little spot that could be a leaf, or I want to create one, I will go ahead and do the negative painting, leaving the negative space as the leaf, and then I'm blending it into the background. And I'm putting a little bit of purple in here because I want some more purple to tie in those centers of the poppies. A little purple there because I love purple. And see that little bit of a faint leaf right there? I'm just going to take my brush, and with the thick paint, you just lay it down on the line, and then this outer edge you soften with water and leave the other one on the inside alone. Let's come down on the other side, and I'm using a green so you can mix up your colors. And now you can see when you're blending it onto the background, you're layering those colors in the background. So I love how that looks, the background all different colors, and it's very soft. Put a little bit of color into those leaves just for fun, whatever you want to do. Like I said, there's no right, no wrong. So I hope that from watching my videos, you're learning some different techniques. That's really all you need to know is the techniques, and then your imagination, you can paint anything. So once you've got your water mastered, that's the hardest part, is learning how much water to put in your paint, number one, and then how much water to use on your painting and how to control that. You always can paint anything then if you know little different techniques like that. They come in very useful. So that's the hardest part with watercolor. Watercolor is one of the hardest mediums to use. For one thing is you go from light to dark. Instead of like acrylic or oil, you could always add light on top of it. It's harder to do that with watercolor, so you want to leave your lights in and start with your lights, and then you build until you get your darks in there. But the other thing is controlling the water. So when I teach my little classes, I like to tell people to think of it as painting with tinted water rather than painting with paint. So your colors that are your paints are just tints to tint your water. So you're either going to tint it darker or lighter depending on how much water you use with it. So if you use a lot of water on it and it's very faintly tinted, almost like Kool-Aid, that could be like a tea consistency. People call it tea. Or you could add a little bit more paint and less water and make it a little bit darker. I call that a skim milk because you can still see through it, but you're starting to not see through it as much. It's not just tinted a little bit, it's more paint, more pigment is in it. And then there's the cream consistency, kind of like a half and half consistency. So that's a little bit more pigment and less water. And then there is the heavy cream consistency, which is like melted ice cream. So if you think dairy, all your dairy products, you can figure that out. But it's just how much water and how much pigment or paint is in it. So this is a lot more pigment, than water with what I'm using here. So you almost want it to be able to stand up off the top of the paper, like when you look at it at the size, it's standing up. And that gives you enough paint to go ahead and dip your brush in the water and move it around. And enough to move it around to where you can make a real soft edge. If you don't have enough paint in that line, it's just going to stay right there. Kind of like that right there. I didn't have quite enough, so I'm going back with a little bit more paint. But ideally, you want it to just be very soft flow where you don't see that it's an outline. Well, you see that it's an outline, but you don't see a single width of the brush outline and then blend in the background. You want it to just blend right from where you applied it. So on the right side, that bottom one, that would be ideally what I'm looking for. And the one that I did with the purple and the blue on the left side I just did, I can still see some of that outline, and that wouldn't be ideal. But it's not horrible, it's just not the perfect application of that technique. So just painting in some of these lines, and then going ahead and putting just a dab more color in there. And when you're placing your leaves, think about where they would be coming from. Most of them are coming from behind, but if they're coming from around your flower, close to your flower, you want to place them in between the petals. So they're going to start there, in between the petals, and then I like to always put a curve in my leaves and not make them stick straight coming out. Everything looks better with a little C curve to it. So I place it right between the petals and then curve it out and around the flower. And that's a good example of that right there. And it looks a little bit more natural, and because it has more movement. So if they're just coming stick straight out and don't have any bend in it or any curve, it sticks out like a sore thumb. You see it right away. Your eye goes right to it. So just to keep things soft and have curves in them, always looks a little bit more natural. And then blend that color right out. You can see how much that added to the painting. Instead of just a plain background, now we have a bunch of leaves. So it looks like it's in a garden. And there's different levels and layers of leaves, those light washy ones that I did. And then we came back with the negative painting and put those on top of it. And now I'm just putting some details on these background petals here. So those are another layer because they're going to be in the background. Little veins in there. It's a little confusing with all those stems going through there at this point, but I'm going to make the stems darker. So it's the last thing I'm going to do is make those stems darker, kind of like what I'm doing right there. So I just put some of my darkest green on there and doing that negative painting, and then I can come back in after that dries and add a little bit more color to it. So at this point I'm just kind of filling in that space that's between that background leaf, and I come back after and fill that in. I could have done it right now, but it was still wet in the middle there. So I like to let it dry. Sometimes I get ahead of myself. So, and then I'm putting this dark kind of greenish black. In there, you can use whatever colors you like. But then when I blend that out, it kind of brings the poppies out a little bit more because I'm adding that darker than the poppies background in there, and it pops the poppies out. I could go even darker if I really wanted to get dramatic with it. Sometimes I even put like an all black background in there to really pop them out. I was going for more of a soft kind of look in this one. Now I'm getting out my quill and I'm letting that stuff dry. And in my quill, I want to do those stamens. So I got Payne's Gray and I put some kind of heavy cream consistency paint in the quill there. And then I just drawing my stamens and those little dots in there, lots of little dots. And that's what I love about poppies. I love all the little stamens in there. They're happy. So I'm just drawing it with my quill because it's much easier than a brush. That's all. It's just another little trick there that I love to do. And turn that painting. Remember, it's not glued down to the table. I try to keep it as still as possible for you, but when I'm painting just by myself, I turn that painting any way that it's easier for me to access the part that I'm painting on. So that's why you could always paint on a block like this, or if I have a sheet of paper, I tape it down to a piece of foam core. It's called foam cord. It's like a cardboard that has foam in between. You can get it at Walmart or Dollar Store or anything. And I'll take those and I'll make them about the size of my painting, leaving a couple inches around the outside, cover it with packing tape, and then you can reuse it over and over and over again. So I have several of those boards, different sizes, for different paintings, paper sizes. So it's the foam board. Some people will use like a masonite and then tape their painting to the masonite. So I just tape it down with masking tape. That I found that to be the best. I've used washi tape, painter's tape. You know, it's all okay. But I just like masking tape. I think it sticks down the best, and you just have to be careful when you peel it off so you don't tear your paper. Go really slow. It works great. But I do like painting on these blocks. The blocks are glued, like there might be 20 sheets of paper in the block. And it's glued on all four sides. And then they have one little area that's not, where you can just stick like a palette knife or something, a butter knife, and go around the edges to get your painting off the block. But there you go. You can see the stamens. Bring it up close to you. You can see all those colors in the negative painting, and all the petals, how they're separated, and the highlights in the petals. I also signed my name with that quill. And at this point, I forgot to finish the stems, so I'm going to pop in a picture of it with the stems finished for you. Sorry about that. Sometimes I get caught up and forget what I'm doing here. But that's the painting, and I hope you enjoyed this video. And I thank you for staying to the end, and I thank all of you who have subscribed to my videos. If you got something out of it and you'd like to subscribe, I'd appreciate that. And push that little like button and notification bell if you want to know when I release the videos. So until I see you next time, be colorful, be creative, be SwiftArt. May joy and love be with you all your days. Bye-bye.